John Barnes, I'm the chairman of the Ballarat Bicycle User Group. We're there to basically advocate for better infrastructure for bikes. We're not so much on about sports cycling, we're more on about recreational and commuter cycling. So we reckon that if we can encourage more people to get on bikes and give it a try with their family on a weekend, that some of them will become regular commuters to work and to school and so on. And that's where we see the future of cycling in Ballarat, that it'll be an everyday sort of thing. We're convinced that good urban design allows for people to move around in fairly benign and active and healthy ways, and cycling is one of those, being a pedestrian is another, and too much of our design tends to be geared towards cars. We're just trying to correct that imbalance. Really, when you look at the successful cities in the world that have very active commuters, they walk, they use public transport, or they ride bikes, the design of those areas is much denser than we design our cities, and they have a much smaller ecological footprint than the sort of cities that we design. The Ballarat City Council, at the urging of groups like ours, BalBUG, adopted a Ballarat Bicycle Strategy in 2008, and it goes until 2013. So currently we're in the 4th year of that strategy, and it identified a whole range of fairly minor infrastructure works that were to take place in consecutive years around the city that were going to link up bits of the disjointed and disparate bike network to make it more rideable, to make it more attractive to people who perhaps aren't riding. And I've got to say that out of 7 out of 10 is about where I'd give it at the moment. Most of those works have been completed or are scheduled to be completed, but there are a couple of major omissions, and we've been advocating to council to rectify that. Peel Street was the biggest single expenditure item, and as Ballarat people would be aware, there is a bit of a choke point through Peel Street when it goes through the Bridge Mall, and this happens to be a major link point between the north and south sections of the Yarrawee River Trail, and the Yarrawee River Trail is a fabulous recreational resource that is becoming far more recognised by walkers and riders, and it cries out for fixing that link basically from the Eastern Oval through until White Flat, and that section through Peel Street is a major effort. The bike strategy anticipated $700,000 to $800,000 being spent on improving that corridor for bicycles. It was to have been spent in the 2nd year of the strategy. Here we are in the 4th year of the strategy, and we still don't have a plan. The Peel Street thing has been caught up within the CBD strategy. So the council has some very ambitious plans. This council has some very ambitious plans for redeveloping the CBD, which requires Mayor Street to be given a much higher priority to take most of the traffic that doesn't need to come into the shopping areas, and they are finding it difficult to get all of the pieces in place and to start implementing it, and they now have some ideas for Peel Street, and we're saying, okay, those ideas have got to include the bike infrastructure, and we're anticipating that it won't take place this financial year, but that it will take place next financial year, the 5th year of the bike strategy.
Okay, is it part of the Bakery Hill Precinct redevelopment? Have they included it with that?
Well, yes, when that went on public display, it showed no bike infrastructure at all, and said that it was going to be deferred off until the 2nd or 3rd year of that precinct strategy. And we said, hang on a minute, you've got a bike strategy, it's identified this, it's identified the money, we've got written confirmation from the council year after year that it does intend to proceed with Peel Street, and your plans don't show it. So we have spoken with the officers concerned. We've spoken with the traders, the bridge mill traders, and they are quite sympathetic to the inclusion of bike infrastructure through Peel Street. They want people to go to the bridge mill in any way that they can get there, and they see bikes as a legitimate way of doing that. And in fact, to our surprise, indicated that they would be prepared to forego some of the parking in Peel Street to allow for bike infrastructure.
Okay, but at this stage we're looking at not next year but the year after.
Next financial year, so sometime in 2012-2013, we anticipate that bike lanes will go in on Peel Street.
Yeah.
Geelong Road, which is a Vic Roads responsibility rather than a Ballarat City Council, though of course they've got an interest in what's going on. That is a very narrow corridor. At peak times it chokes up. Bikes can offer part of the solution to that clutter and to that gridlock. We, along with the Ballarat City Council, have been in discussion with Vic Roads about trying to find enough space to have some bike lanes as part of that road that heads from Ballarat out to the university and picks up those primary and secondary schools along the way that help cause all of that traffic choke. Cyclists hate double lane roundabouts of bike riders. Sports cyclists are usually quick enough on their racing bikes to get through. Doesn't bother them. But for a commuter cyclist, a double lane roundabout is a no-go zone because cars are moving, crossing lanes, going out of exits and so on, and if you're trying to go straight or make a right-hand turn on a push bike, you're very vulnerable. So we would be, and we have been talking with Vic Roads about trying to provide some bicycle infrastructure that allows cyclists to get out of the two traffic lanes and to get through the intersection in a different way. Always difficult though, and we would much prefer to see traffic lights rather than double lane roundabouts. The design of roundabouts in Britain and throughout parts of Europe are different to the designs here. The entrances for vehicles into roundabouts here tend to come in at a tangent so that you can come in at a much faster pace. For people who've been to the UK and Europe and driven there, they will appreciate that you come in almost at right angles to roundabouts in those areas, and you have to slow down much more. In Amsterdam, in other parts of Europe where cycling is prevalent, as commuter cycling, traffic lights are seen as a favoured way of controlling intersections. So everybody gets their turn, and in fact in Copenhagen they actually have phased lights so that buses and bikes get a head start on everybody else, so that they can get on their way or even through an intersection before the cars start to come at them. And we would see that Ballarat and Victoria generally could benefit from some of those lessons that have been learnt overseas. We're a long way behind the Europeans and a long way behind some of the Asian cities. If you've ever been to Japan, it's staggering the numbers of people who are riding bikes. Even when it's raining, they just ride it with their umbrella up. Nobody dresses in lycra and tries to ride fast. It's just a different culture. But what all of those areas, those other parts of the world have that is different from Australia is cities that are medium and high density, and the numbers of people who are demanding bike and pedestrian infrastructure and are using public transport and don't even own cars is far higher than in Australia. And getting from where we are to where they are is a massive change. And in a place like Ballarat where one of the virtues for a lot of people is to be able to drive their car and park, if not in front of the shop that they want to go into. After a couple of laps of the block, they'll get within a couple of car parks of it anyway, and they see that as a virtue. I don't necessarily. I think that is a fairly inefficient way of having people move around, but I understand the convenience of it. So getting people to realise that they can park their bike against a shop window and they can go to the front door on that is another thing entirely. And I'd love to see that culture change. We're hoping to work towards it, but we've got a long way to go to get to have people accept that riding a bike is cool. You don't look like a dork. That it's healthy, that it's good fun, and that it's efficient. And on surveys taken in Copenhagen, most of the users have identified the efficiency of riding bikes as opposed to any of the other benefits. It's way ahead. It's quick. They can get on a bike, they can go to another business or a meeting that they've got to go to in another part of the city far quicker than they can any other way. And they're happy to rug up in snowy weather and so on. It's still quicker and it's more convenient. Bike riders in Ballarat have got to be very alert. They've got to be hyper conscious of other road users because unfortunately too few drivers of cars and trucks and the likes take into account the needs of bike riders. It's getting better, but they've still got a fair way to go. The other thing that the sports cyclists, the weekend warriors and so on, too often they will exhibit behaviours in relation to going through red lights or riding in a bunch at a rate that will slow traffic and so on, that infuriates drivers. And I'd be putting in a plea for them to go two abreast and make sure that they follow all the road rules. Yes, the current position of the Ballarat Bicycle User Group is that it supports helmet wearing. We know that it is a disincentive for some people, particularly women, who do not want their hair crushed and arrive at work and they look as though they need to go to the hairdresser, sort of thing. That can be counteracted in some ways by having an appropriate haircut that doesn't flatten out. But it is a problem. We know that with the Melbourne bike hire scheme that it's one of the impediments to have people take that spur of the moment decision that, I want to get 3 blocks away, I'll get on one of these hire bikes, because they must wear a helmet. There is a bit of a debate going as to whether helmets cause more injuries than they save. I think Victoria probably took the right decision 30 years ago when it decided to have compulsory helmet wearing. One of the areas where we have been frustrated with the Ballarat City Council's performance over the last 3.5 years of the strategy, the Ballarat Skipton Rail Trail, for instance, had nearly $1 million spent on it, and it was a substantial upgrade. We were given undertakings that there would be a community advisory group set up to provide input to the 3 councils that are responsible for the rail trail and provide feedback on the ride experience, on maintenance issues, on development things, and on promotion. And that advisory committee has never been formed. We've advocated time and time again to the city of Ballarat in particular. They are probably the biggest stakeholder, and they've certainly got the greatest capacity in terms of promotion. We've advocated to them to get that advisory committee established and so on, and it just hasn't happened. Council hasn't appointed a dedicated bike officer. It has identified a recreation person who has taken on responsibility for bikes, and I must say he's thrown himself into it and done a pretty good job, given that he's got a whole range of other responsibilities. But in terms of coordinating council's efforts, I would much prefer to see a dedicated cycling officer who is in there banging heads together saying, hang on a minute, you've got to take into account the needs for cyclists and pedestrians in these designs or in your plans for future growth areas and the likes, and being a constant voice in there saying, here we are, you've got to allow for it. And I don't sense that that's happening. For about the last 5 years, we've been involved in a regular meeting, perhaps 4 times a year, 5 times a year, with council officers who all have something to do with bike riding, and we've been trying to get them to coordinate their approach. And we've made small steps, but it's frustrating that they're not big enough. We haven't started work on the new strategy, so over the next 2 or 3 months we will pin down the timetable for how the strategy will be put together. So what are the key achievements we need to have in place to ensure that the thing is adopted by council and resourced in their budget process from 2013 onwards. So that's about to be pinned down. We would hope that we'll be able to get some sort of bike seminar going so that people who have an interest in bikes and their interaction with other traffic and traffic design and all that sort of stuff will have an opportunity to come along, hear some ideas from people who are doing things in other parts of the state and who can relate what's going on elsewhere in the world, and challenge us all a little bit to think a bit more broadly about what are the possibilities with this. And that would kick off a process that would involve, I would imagine, some public consultation, a draft strategy, a public comments phase, and the adoption of a final strategy. Well, they haven't ignored the strategy. As I said earlier, they've done most of the strategy. They've missed out on a couple of big, hard projects, and we're trying to steal their resolve on those ones so that they will still deliver them within this current 5-year strategy. We see that we've made pretty reasonable strides from where we were prior to this strategy, where cycling was having about $130,000 per annum spent on it. It's now directly having anywhere between 300 and 8 or 900,000 per annum, depending on whether those big projects get picked up in 1 year or over a couple of years. No, those big racing events and so on are part of Ballarat's tourism effort, but they don't leave a lasting legacy for bike riders. Sure, there is a national road racing course that is something that locals can ride on, and is an attraction for people who might be considering coming for a training ride in Ballarat. So it's not a bad thing, but in terms of getting people on commuter bikes, on recreational riding, the family that doesn't want to have conflict with traffic because their kids are a bit young, they want a safe place to ride. That those areas are ones that are not touched upon by those big events. So we're getting some improvements. We need to get a few more, and the vast majority of bike riders are in fact recreational riders, and it's really getting them comfortable enough with moving around Ballarat and saying, maybe I can try riding to work a couple of days a week, or riding to my school, or whatever it might be. The City of Ballarat sees value in the sports cyclists and the connection with the big events, and marketing Ballarat as a cycling destination from that point of view. Certainly things like the rail trail, we believe have enormous potential for bringing in tourists, and they do in other parts of Victoria. where they are marketed properly, and we've failed abysmally on the marketing and, I must say, now on the maintenance of the Ballarat Skipton Rail Trail. The very severe storms we had earlier in the year have left some lasting damage that still hasn't been completely repaired. So we're letting ourselves down. We could make much more of that asset. The Victorian Auditor-General made a critique of the Victorian Bicycle Strategy earlier in the year, and this was a Labor strategy, but I think there are some lessons in what the Auditor said for all of us, and that is that apart from promoting the positives of cycling, they actually have to discourage other forms of transport, such as cars, to make it safer for people to be on bikes, for people to feel more comfortable about taking that option. In Ballarat, we do not have a traffic management plan adopted by the Ballarat City Council. We do not have a car parking strategy. These two things have to be thought about, and the CBD strategy talks about Mayor Street taking the bulk of traffic in an east-west direction, and avoiding it coming into the CBD, and slowing traffic speeds down in the CBD to 40 kilometres per hour. Now, from a bike point of view, 40 kilometres an hour would be fabulous. I'm not sure how the public will receive the changes that are going to have to be put in place to realise that CBD strategy. But it needs to be a complete package, and it needs to link in with perhaps a free bus service looping around the city that you can get on and off at no cost, and it links up to some big car parks on the fringe of the CBD, so that people can feel comfortable about leaving their car there, move around, and they'll be brought back to their car. So there's a bit to be done on that too. In a decade's time, maybe regional cities like Ballarat and Bendigo and Geelong and so on would also have publicly available bike hire schemes. You know, they work fabulously in Paris, for instance. The traffic there, you think, is mayhem, but bikes work.